SAU school board meeting for tonight at 6:02. And our first action on the agenda this evening is to actually go into non-public session for RSA 91-A, /3, subsection C. Entertain a motion to do so.
I'll make that motion.
First by Mr. Gothier, second.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Grund. And Mr. Gronstra, are you present?
He's not listed on our panel list yet. And I don't know if he's on there. I don't know what his phone number is. I could have bumped him.
Oh, I know his phone number. You want it?
You know his phone number?
Yeah.
I do.
I
Is
do.
that him right there?
I don't know.
Yep. Find it.
Can you read it to me? for me?
603-591-6849.
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect.
I'm bumping him.
Right.
Now you can check with him.
Mr. Gronstra, if you can hear me, if you could just state your name, tell us that you are incapable of being here this evening and that you are on. Try that again. Can you try that one more time? Brian, do you have that? Okay.
You had it for a moment.
Don't worry, we'll get back.
Hello.
Mr. Gronstra, you are on speakerphone. We are entertaining a motion to go into non-public. Once we get out of non-public, we'll have you rejoin back in the Zoom. But just for the record, if you could just state your name, the fact that you are incapable of being here this evening and that you are alone.
Yeah. But I am not alone. I'm with my wife and son.
Great. So we will not be able to do a non-public session then with Mr. Gronstra. Okay. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and do a roll call vote, starting off down at the end of the table.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Bruce, yes.
Gothier, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Ron, yes.
Peters, yes.
Glover, yes.
Glazer, yes.
Yes.
Mark, yes. Baker, yes.
Great.
Yes.
And Mr. Eckhoff's last. Perfect. That motion passes. We're going to step out of the room so everyone doesn't have to leave. We're going to head into the music room. Then we'll be back when we're done. Perfect. Thank you. All right. This body just met in non-public session to discuss a multitude of issues. And we're ready to share them with the public here. So the first one is I'm going to read a quick statement and then we're going to entertain a motion and then have discussion on that motion. So the SAU board is announcing the closure of the Title IX and Title VII process that began at our November 18, 2021 SAU board meeting, and the decision to hire an outside professional to act as the Title IX coordinator under policy ACAC. This 11-month process came to an end upon notification to us on October 7th, with a final determination from an appellate decision maker. In summary, the result is that Mr. Glover's behavior was found not to be sexual harassment and that there was no formal complaint, which is required by policy ACAC before a sexual harassment investigation can proceed. This evening, this board has met in non-public to discuss balancing the public's interest in this matter and the personnel privacy interests of its employees. I'm sorry, the personal privacy interests of its employees. This board will now entertain the following motion: that having balanced the public's interest in the conduct of its elected officials with the personal privacy interests of its employees, that the board authorizes redaction of any personally identifiable information regarding the complaints, and that upon completion of the necessary redaction, it release the independent investigation, appendix to the investigation, initial determination of responsibility, appendix to the initial determination of, appendix to the initial determination, appeal, notice of appeal, appeal statement, an appellate decision relative to the complaints involving board member John Glover's conduct at the meeting of November 9th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
First by Ms. Grund, seconded by
Second.
Ms. Zimmerman. Any discussion?
May I?
Yes.
One quick thing, when you read it, you said regarding the complaints, and to be clear, we're redacting the information regarding the complainants. The individual, the identities of the employee individuals who were involved. Little tiny thing, but, and I've said this before, but obviously my opinion is that we have to release this. We took the position last fall when this investigation was started. I was not at the board at the time, but I was in the audience, and the position was that we were going to release it. I think it's important to release it. And I think it's important for everyone concerned to have it released so that we can fully and completely look at what happened, what can we do better next time, all of those aspects, and we can't do that without releasing the document.
Thank you.
Documents.
Any other discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
On principle, these documents exist without a basis. So my default position would be say, don't release them because they shouldn't exist. They should be shredded. Now, that would be a disservice to the community because there's absolutely no transparency with that. So you can say in a sentence or two what is important. It's not that there was no formal complaint filed and that's all fine. That is the heart of this matter. A sentence the public should know is because no formal complaint was filed in this matter, SAU 39 violated its policy and had no authority to adjudicate its policy BCA, which is an ethics policy. Among other reasons, policy BCA was never discussed or acted upon by any board. And if the public must know, John Glover was not found to be a sexual harasser. That is the outcome of nearly 400 pages of record. There are serious concerns with some of the people hired to produce this record. There are misconstructions of facts that I've rebutted in this record many times over. And finally, it came to a sensible decision, in my view. Redacting this many pages may fail the employees. That's a risk. It puts this in my whole entire lifetime, all this record. I don't know that that's fair. And this question and this motion was written by, I believe, our counsel, and I think it's a second opinion from a truly independent counsel would be warranted before we make this decision. So for those reasons, I will vote against this motion.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Ms. Glazer?
So while I understand Mr. Glover's concerns, I just want to respond to that briefly. First, it's impossible, even what he just relayed to us, as far as concerns about the process, concerns about how it was handled, concerns about the different people involved. We can't have a discussion about that unless the record is in the public domain. And again, we came before you all, as I look out the audience last November, and said, you will have every piece of paper. You will have all this. You will have the full report. I believe those were language, the full report. And we can't pick and choose on that. And because it might reflect poorly on the board or might not, but I mean, it might reflect on how it was handled or the people that were used to handle it. We have to have that out in the public, because unless we can use that, unless we can talk about it, unless we can look back at what went wrong and look back at what went okay, we're never going to learn from this. We're never going to do better next time. And we're never going to be able to fix the problems. And it found, as Mr. Glover said, that he was not a sexual harasser. There have been many meetings where he's raised this issue, where we've raised the issue, where I raised the issue sitting out there, and where I've raised the issue sitting here. where we've discussed this. So as far as the issue being in the public domain, it's been in the public domain since last November. This paperwork is going to actually confirm and close once and for all that there was not the violation of ACAC by Mr. Glover, but has to be resolved, openly examined so that we can look at what can be done differently and what should have been done differently, if anything, but what should have been done differently.
Thank you. Any additional discussion?
I just want
Ms.
to say I
Grant.
agree with everything that Hannah just mentioned.
Thank you.
Let's just make sure, Steve, that everybody's using a microphone because as someone that was home for the
Somebody-
last one of these meetings, you
Yes.
cannot hear a thing.
So you just want to say that one more time?
Yeah, I just one moment. Just want to say that I agree with everything that Hannah Zimmerman just mentioned.
Great, thank you. Seeing no further discussion, let's call the vote. And since we have nobody remote, we can just raise.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes,
Out of respect for the people who are here, and possibly the people who are remotely here who could contribute, I move that we take all votes at the end of our discussion of whatever motions are coming up next, so that the public have an opportunity to comment on based on the totality of what they've heard, and that their voices can at least potentially be persuasive in our decision-making.
yeah, Mr. Glover, I don't know if we can have a discussion because we didn't vote to release any of the information.
We said vote before we can discuss. We have to vote to release it before we can discuss.
It's sad that then I move that we have a public comment right now to hear from them on this one issue.
Yep.
Then when we have the next issue, before motion is this, I move that public comment period precede any and all votes that are taken on this agenda topic tonight.
Mr. Glover, I'm going to rule that motion out of order. There's a motion on the floor. You can amend the motion. You can vote no on the motion, or you can call the vote.
I move to amend the motion with all of the words that it currently says, but begin with the words, after completion of public comment on this motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Bayou. Any discussion on the motion?
I have a
Ms. Grant?
I just need clarification. If we don't pass this first, can we not go on to the rest of the information that we discussed about these reports?
Yes, because we would not, as a board, have rules that we balance the public's interest with the conduct of its elected
So-
officials.
So we need to pass this in order to continue the discussion on
Correct.
the reports.
It's the
And is
order
it
and the
our
rules.
intent to have a public comment after we go through the rest of that report? Is it our intent to have a public comment session after we go through the rest of the report? If we vote yes to approve this, we go through the rest of the report, is it our intent then to have a public comment session after that point?
100% correct. So we're
Thank
going
you.
to have.
So we are going to have public comment tonight is the end all summary that we're going to have.
Yeah, so right
Yeah.
after our board statements, we're going to entertain two more motions, and then after the third motion, we are going to open up the floor for public comment.
I think of it as more of a, we're not gonna have a discussion, we're just gonna hear from the public. You normally start a meeting and for the public input, and we're not doing that tonight for some reason. And I think it's an important thing to do, to hear what they have to say before we go on this.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Ms. Glazer?
The only thing I would say is that the problem is going to be that there's a lot of information that's going to be given as soon as we're allowed to release this, that we're not going to be able to release. And so if we're going to have public comment before releasing the details of who was hired, what was done, who said what it cost, all that stuff, we should at least then limit this public comment to the issue of, do they want this information released? Is this information going to be released or not? Because I think the whole reason it was set up this way this evening is that we can provide information and then take feedback instead of feedback being given kind of in a vacuum, which is where the public is right now, and then us respond. So if the motion is to have public comment on whether or not the investigation and its findings and its reports should be released, I don't have an issue on that. But because we're going to be giving a bunch of information immediately after that, I think that initial public comment then should be limited to that issue.
Thank you.
I support that, and I would hope that the public would respect that.
Any more discussion? Mr. Bayou's seconded and Mr. Glover's first motion. Okay, seeing none, let's call the vote. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand.
Steve, can you recap the motion here? Because I believe John just said that he would.
Before the vote on releasing the document.
So the motion that John had made, and Mr. Glover, keep us honest, that you said that you are going to, you requested that we modify at the ends that public comment be made prior to any vote.
Yes,
Thank you.
And are you sticking with that motion?
yes,
I
that's
thought
the,
your comment a second ago just said that you hope the public would allow us to vote on this so we can release it and then do a public comment after. But
no. I was echoing what Anna Goulet Zimmerman said about please limit your comments to the question about whether to release the documents.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to do this by board, but bear with us while we pull up the spreadsheet. All right, from the Amherst School Board, if you can raise your hand if you're in favor of the motion. Opposed to the motion from the Amherst School Board. The Mount Vernon School Board in favor of the motion. Opposed to the motion from the Mount Vernon School Board. Abstentions? Oh, you're in favor? The Sohegan School Board in favor? Opposed? So that motion passes 6.25 to 2.75 no. So we will now vote on the actual motion that now reads that we will not vote on any motions prior to taking any public comment for those motions. Back to the underlying motion now that's been amended.
Isn't that what we just voted on?
Yeah, I think so.
That we voted to amend. And now we're voting on the motion that
Okay.
the exact statement that having balanced the public's interest in the conduct of its elected officials with the personal privacy interests of its employees, that the board authorized redaction or any personally identifiable information regarding the complaints, and that upon completion of the necessary redaction, it released the independent investigation, the appendix to the investigation, the initial determination of responsibility, appendix to initial determination, appeal, notice of appeal, appeal statement, an appellate decision relative to the complaints involving board member John Glover's conduct at the meeting of November 9th, 2021, and that we not vote on any motions prior to receiving public comment.
So point of order though, is that he actually removed all of that language as part of his motion. So before he made the amendment, he removed our entire motion.
Look, hey, oh my goodness. This is pretty simple. I think the public deserves to be heard before we make decisions so that their input can be considered. The point here is to
Oh, we're
hear
back
from them
on.
on this point before we vote on this motion that you've made. Now, whatever procedural mechanism needs to be done in order to get to that effect, then let's do that. Or we can dispense with all of these formalities and we can ask them to please respect the question. And if they have something come up, and do so now, and we can move this forward.
The only thing that matters is that his amendment removes our wording from the motion.
So I think we all agree that we can vote after hearing public input. So can I move that we proceed with public input so we can vote on whether or not we can release the investigative reports and associated documents?
Motion's on the floor to table the motion at hand. And then we'll entertain a second motion to open up for public feedback.
So
Ms. Glazer, you making the motion to table the motion at hand?
Sure.
Seconded by Ms. Peters.
So long.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes. Now, the motion would be made by, I'm assuming, Mr. Glover to open up the floor to feedback from the community. Public comment.
I move that we allow a public comment period now and implore the public to please limit their commentary to the question at hand, which is whether to publicly release the documents associated with this matter.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Grund. All in favor? All opposed? And abstained? Motion carries. We're going to open up the floor for public comment. If I can ask members of the public to come up here to the microphone.
Tiani Coleman,
Yeah, hold on just a
Amherst.
quick second.
Everyone who wants to speak, please don't be distracted by what's about to appear on the screen.
All right, Ms. Coleman, you'll have 3 minutes. The floor is yours. Just again, for the record, state your name, address, or town in which you reside. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Tiani Coleman, Amherst, New Hampshire. And unfortunately, I only had 1 hour tonight, and so it's gone. I have to leave. But I do want to say that I really feel for Mr. Glover and I understand his concern. Nonetheless, I'm in favor of releasing the information because I think that it has already been made public and I think this will actually help it be resolved in his favor. But even more importantly, or maybe just as important, I think we need to have transparency and we need to have accountability. And we can't have that if we don't release this information. So we need to release it so that the town can have the transparency that they need. And important to me is that there be accountability for what happened here. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right, if you can state your name, town in which you reside, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Martin Goulet, Amherst. I was at the SAU board meeting where this matter was teed up, the decision to hire the Title IX coordinator. And I distinctly remember this board and the chair of this board promising that any results of the process that was being kicked off that night would be made public. So it just, I mean, frankly, it boggles the mind that you'd even consider not doing that. You know, were you to decide to do anything other than that full level of transparency would automatically be viewed by many, and I think rightly, as an attempt at a cover up. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, sir, if you could just state your name, town in which you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Anthony Nino, Amherst, New Hampshire. If you decide to release anything, let's make sure that it's factual, because it's going to be permanent. It's my understanding that no formal complaint was filed, and therefore that term should not be used in any of the report, and nor should it be alluded that a formal complaint was made. So if it's going to be released, let's make sure it's factual, because this is going to be permanent once it's released. And again, since there was no formal complaint made, there should be no reference to quote, a complaint or quote, the complaint.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, let's move back to our original. Okay, so tonight we're going to be starting a new process that was began at the Amherst School Board. Let me just read the disclosure statement. It says tonight we will take public comment from our virtual audience. If you wish to speak during the public comment session, we will allow in-person guests to speak for 3 minutes first. Once we go through all the in-person guests, we will open it up for virtual speakers on Zoom. In order to speak, please do the following. Raise your virtual hand, enter your full name in the avatar or profile. When speaking, turn on your microphone and your camera, say your full name and the town of residence. When these are complete, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Great, Carrie Boyd, if you could turn your camera on. Thank you, Carrie. You'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
I'm Carrie Boyd. I live in Amherst, New Hampshire. And first, I wanted to say that I was at the meeting myself, same as Martin, when the last year when this came up and the board approved to go to take the lawyer's opinion and to move forward to hire a Title IX expert. And I do believe that when that occurred, your board should have done due diligence to get a second opinion. It was very clear that this was false to begin with. And my heart does go out to John Glover. And because of the lack of transparency and the lack of due diligence your board did on behalf of its taxpayers, I believe that everything should be transparent and every single document should be given to the public so we can figure out why this went so very wrong for John and the taxpayers. And for the people that now have to foot the bill for the very large bill that we have endured because of this awful mistake that you allowed to happen. It's beyond my comprehension that when I sat there a year ago and watched this all unfold, that no one questioned that this seemed so very wrong. So I implore you to release every single document so we know exactly what happened in the public, because this should never happen again. No one should ever be put in this position. He is a volunteer. And by keeping those documents closed, you're trying to protect whoever brought this forward and whoever kept this investigation going in a false way. And shame on whoever did that. Thank you.
Seeing no other comments from the public. Perfect. All right, let's go back to the table motion.
Do you want a motion to remove it from the table?
All right, so for clarity and for clarity purposes, Ms. Peters, the recollection of the superintendent and myself is that we modified the motion with that language to open it up for public comment at the end. The motion to table that particular motion is the one that we actually passed. So do we want to pass this motion now to go ahead and authorize us to release this information as a separate item?
I think we want a new motion.
Thanks.
Do you want me to? Oh, you're gonna make it.
Yeah, I'll reread it to the public. A repeat. A motion that having balanced the public's interest in the conduct of its elected officials with the personal privacy interest of its employees, that the board authorize redaction of any personally identifiable information regarding the complainants, and that upon completion of the necessary redaction, it release the independent investigation, appendix to the investigation, initial determination of responsibility, appendix to the initial determination, appeal, notice of appeal, appeal statement, and appellate decision relative to the complaints involving board member John Glover's conduct at the meeting of November 9th, 2021.
I'll make that motion.
First by Mr. Gothier, seconded by Ms. Peters. Discussion.
Yes, I have something to say.
Mr. Glover, go ahead.
I appreciate what Tiani, Martin, Anthony, and Carrie said, and also what Anna has said about, this idea of transparency. Personally, I don't really have there's nothing in there that I'm worried about. There are misconstructions that I have rebutted. I mentioned that earlier. So if I have to keep rebutting those for the rest of my life, I guess I will do that. And I will continue to fight that good fight to the extent it rears its ugly head in my life. And, but your arguments about transparency and accountability and having a full discussion and really shining a light on this is persuasive to me. So I will change my no vote, my principled no vote, to a yes vote for those reasons. However, I would like to see two words changed in this motion. Complainants to employees and complaints to reports. This is consistent with what Anthony Nino from our public said, and I think he makes a very good point on that. It gives a false impression when we know the final outcome is.
Do you want to make?
So I hereby move that we change the word complainants to employees and the word complaints to the word reports.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Grunt.
Can we discuss for a moment?
Yes, discussion.
My only concern is that throughout, and I understand it was determined not to be a formal complaint, but throughout all the investigative reports, the reference complainant 1 and complainant 2 are not synonymous with employees necessarily. I mean, there are other employees who wouldn't be redacted for any reason. I mean, this is really difficult because we can't talk really about what's in the documents until we've agreed to, but I think it's unworkable to replace the word complainants. But I'm happy to make a stipulation on the record that we all understand that's referring to the official term used by the initial fact finder in reference to these individuals, not in any way a reflection of whether or not they are, or I did, or whether or not there was a formal complaint. I don't know what else to say other than that, but I don't see how we can remove every reference to every employee in these documents.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
I just wanted to point out as well that complainant is not necessarily always referred to a formal complaint. So according to the policy. So I feel comfortable leaving it the language for that reason.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Clark.
I agree with what Ms. Lawrence just stated. I mean, we've spent an exhaustive amount of time separating what formal complaint is from complainants. And I feel like any other muddling will just contribute to more confusion. So I'm in support of keeping the terminology as it's used in the full report.
Thank you. Mr. Vega.
I don't think, are we talking about amending the documents that came from
amending this motion.
We're amending the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Amending the terms used by in the reports,
In the motion.
in the motion. Okay.
Yes. And to be honest, guys, I can't see everybody, so if I can't see you, raise your hand, just make sure you tap somebody on the shoulder.
The motion in the beginning of it invokes the employees, the public, privacy interests of its employees. So I mean, it's,
I mean,
Yeah.
Escalade is in.
we're balancing in general the public's interest and personal privacy interests of employees generally, but then we go on to specifically say that the employee information that is getting redacted is that regarding the complainants. So I think those are two separate types of employees. I mean, our superintendent's an employee. Are we redacting anything where the superintendent's name is showing up? That, I mean, it just, I don't see how that language can get change without us greatly redacting so much that it's not going to be workable. And I don't think that that's consistent with our obligation to have information released.
I'll just respond to say that's a fair point on the complainants. I would still argue that the word complaints should be changed to reports to avoid false impression and to be clear what we mean.
Any more discussion? Seeing none, let's call the vote. All in favor of Mr. Glover's amendment, raise your hands. One. All opposed, raise your hand. That motion fails. Back to the original motion at hand. Any additional discussion?
I will move that we change the word complaints to reports.
Is there a second? Seeing no second, that fails due to a lack of a second. Back to the original motion. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, let's call the vote. Let's go ahead and all in favor of the motion at hand, raise your hands.
In
All opposed?
protest.
John, were you raising your hand, yes or no?
I'm raising my hand, yes, for this, for what it's doing, not by its language.
That motion passes. All right, this is a statement that the board agreed to, we're gonna go ahead and read it, and then we can open up two additional motions here. So after discussion and the vote, the unique nature of this matter caused a significant reliance on attorneys to engage and structure a process on this board's directive of following our ACAC policy. This process involved multiple parties, steps, and individuals that resulted in an approximate cost of $65,000 to our SAU budget. This includes the attorney that did the initial fact finding, the first decision maker, the appellate decision maker, and our district council. We remain committed to providing a safe, comfortable work environment for all of our employees. We were required to remain impartial and ensure our district was not deliberately indifferent to our employees' feeling of safety in the workplace. We'd like to briefly review the process that was followed in more detail. At our November 18th, 2021 board meeting, this board voted to hire a contracted Title IX coordinator to act as a fact finder to properly investigate the reported complaints regarding John Glover's conduct at a committee meeting on November 9th, 2021. The individual hired was attorney Sarah Hillstead. On June 22nd, Attorney Hillstead issued a report that stated, based on the witnesses interviewed, documents and materials reviewed, and credibility determinations made, and applying a preponderance of the evidence standard, that number one, the preponderance of the evidence supports a finding that at a public meeting at complainant number one and complainant number two's workplace on November 9th, 2021, pornographic audio played loudly from the respondent's cell phone for approximately 20 to 30 seconds. Finding number 2, the preponderance of the evidence supports a finding that despite a no contact directive about which respondent was notified on November 10th, 2021, respondent sent a text to complainant number 1's personal cell phone at 1:35 a.m. on January 4th, 2022, that the complainant number 1 found disturbing and made her feel manipulated and uncomfortable. This investigative report was not provided to the SAU 39 administration nor this board, but was directly delivered to the involved parties and to attorney Megan Glynn, who had been retained to act as the independent decision maker after it was determined this board could not be seen as a neutral decision maker. Ms. Glynn issued her decision on August 26th, 2022, and stated the respondent's conduct did not rise to the level of sexual harassment as articulated by policies ACAC and AC. She did find that Mr. Glover's conduct violated policy BCA, which requires board members to display courtesy and decorum in all public meetings. Once that decision was provided to the involved parties, Mr. Glover filed an appeal on September 26th, asking that number 1, that an appeals decision maker review and determine whether a formal complaint was filed in compliance with policy ACAC. Number 2, that Attorney Glynn's finding of a violation of the BCA be overturned where the SAU Corporation does not have the authority to invoke the grievance process under the ACAC to investigate concerns related to BCA. Attorney Deborah Weiss Ford was retained to act as the appellate decision maker. On October 6th, Attorney Weiss Ford issued a final decision that stated, number 1, SAU 39 and the board did not adhere to the requirements of a formal complaint prior to initiating the Title IX grievance process, as set forth in the Amherst, Mount Vernon, Sohegan, and SAU 39 Title IX sexual harassment policy and grievance process, as no formal complaint was filed in this matter. This failure constitutes a procedural irregularity that affected the outcome of the matter. Pursuant to policy ACAC, a formal complaint is required before an organization begins an investigation of sexual harassment. As set forth above, no formal complaint was filed in this matter. However, an investigation of the alleged sexual harassing conduct began on December 2nd, 2021, with the interview of the complainant. Even if this is assumed for the sake of argument only that Attorney Hillstead's December 13, 2021 email to the respondent constituted a formal complaint, the interview of redacted had also taken place on December 2nd, 2021. And Ms. Parisi was interviewed on December 6th, all before the filing of the purported formal complaint. George Torres and Terry Beam were interviewed on December 13th before Attorney Hillstead drafted the email to the respondent. Therefore, even if December 13th is used as the date of the formal complaint, the investigation process still began prior to its filing in contravention of policy ACAC. The same rationale applies if one assumes for the sake of argument only that the formal complaint was issued on February 17th, 2022 by the complainant's email stating that the respondent texted her in violation of the supportive measures put in place. Because no formal complaint was filed under this matter, SAU 39 violated policy ACAC by invoking Title IX's grievance procedure. Finding number B, or letter B, BCA, Board Member Code of Ethics. It was beyond the scope of Attorney Hillstead's authority to investigate the allegations against the respondent pursuant to policy BCA. The policy itself does not provide authorization for an investigation, nor does it state who would investigate violations of the policy. The board did not authorize Attorney Hillstead to investigate the allegations against the respondent under this policy. Policy ACAC does not reference or otherwise incorporate policy BCA, and therefore authorization to investigate the allegations pursuant to policy ACAC and policy AC cannot be inputted to policy BCA. Accordingly, the findings pursuant to policy BCA are not valid and should be retracted. Tonight, this board will entertain 2 additional motions. After each of those motions are made, we will engage with discussion on each separate motion and then take a vote. After, I will open the floor for comments from any board member who wishes to discuss this issue. We will limit that discussion to 30 minutes unless a board member makes a motion to extend that time limit. After that discussion, I'll open the floor for public comment. The second motion. This board now forwards this now resolved matter to the Sohegan Cooperative School Board to resolve any issues regarding policy BCA and resolve it as they see fit. The motion is made by Ms. Peters,
I'll second.
seconded by Ms. Parisi. Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
I wholeheartedly do not support this motion on the basis that this board never took any action with respect to policy BCA. So there's nothing for this board to move forward to any other board. This is improper procedure to pass this motion. If the Sohegan Cooperative School Board at its own meeting wishes to discuss policy BCA or any other policies that it has, that is its sole authority and right to do so or not do so. This board has nothing to say about that.
Ms. Glaze Zimmerman?
I'm going to agree with Mr. Glover on this. Particularly in light of Deborah Weiss Ford's finding that the findings regarding BCA should be stricken. I don't think there is any BCA finding or issue that's live on the floor to be forwarded to Sohegan Cooperative School Board. And again, as Mr. Glover mentioned, if we feel a policy has been violated, it needs to be addressed. That's something we can raise at our meeting without the need for a referral from this larger board.
Ms. Grant?
Yes, I'm agreeing with both Anna and John on that. I think so he can choose to take this up. But to have the SAU board make a motion to push it down to us feels authoritative.
Mr. Gothier?
I think, I don't disagree with what they just said. I think the only thing we have to do on top of this is have this go back to the SAU policy committee to I don't know what you do with this garbage thing. It's a dumpster fire because there's no enforcement in it. There's no ethics for this board to necessarily take. There's no punishment for this board to get involved in. It's all going to be in the local board. So I think this policy needs to be reworked to either get rid of it or to find some sort of punitive measures after investigations and the like take place so that it actually has some meaning and some teeth to it.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Ms. Beebe?
So I guess I have more question. How would we officially request the BCA be taken up by our policy or to reevaluate? Because I do believe it's required.
Yep, we can amend the next motion to include also BCA.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more discussion on this?
I
Ms.
have,
Lawrence?
oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I agree. I think if it were to be discussed at that board level, and get it back to the policy committee. Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
I have one
Mr. Glover?
piece. I think this is pretty clear where this is going, but if any of the public disagrees with this, defeating this motion, then I would like for them to have an opportunity to speak. It seems pretty clear to me, but I think that the process of engaging the public on this at regular intervals is important. So I don't want to make an assumption, but if someone wants to raise a hand and I see it in 2 seconds, nobody's raising their hand. So no further discussion from me.
Seeing no further discussion, I'm sorry, Ms. Clark.
Sorry, I just want to confirm one thing. We never initiated BCA, so we don't need to close the loop on anything in this regard, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, let's call the vote. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. That motion fails. The third motion is to forward policy ACAC, and I'm going to add BCA. to the policy committee for review and suggestions for modifications for future adoption to address procedural issues experienced during this matter.
I'll make that motion.
Made by Ms. Grunt, second,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Lawrence. Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
I think this board is obliged to give the policy committee some direction as to what in these policies is to be examined. Because I went through policy ACAC from stem to stern, and I can tell you there's really nothing fundamentally wrong with that policy. The implication that we can go back to policy committee and solve what happened here is a fiction. We have a people problem here. The people did this. People are at the leadership of SAU 39 Corporation. And the actions taken by the people are what caused this. So, and as much as I'm happy to review policy and consider making improvements to policy, do not think for 1 second that the solution to the problem we're facing here is policy ACAC or policy BCA or policy AC or any other policy we have in our school system.
Any other discussion?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Mr. Vaden?
I just want to recognize that we have a lot of issues that we need to break this, to unpack in this, that we need to have a very thorough postmortem, and I think ACAC, going back to the policy committee is harmless. The worst they're gonna say is that, no, it's fine as it is, or they can have some amendments to it, but I think, this is just a very small piece of what we're going to be working on over the next few months in regards to this whole incident.
Ms. Goulet Zimmerman?
And I would add that I do think there's some work on it that can be done in the policy committee, because ACAC is, as it's set up currently, is really intended to be handled internally with our Title IX coordinator and then the superintendent acting as the decision maker. So the particular circumstances of this, the board chose to follow policy ACAC, but the policy does not actually address specifically how we would address this situation were it to come up again. And things like, I don't know, we could talk about things like timelines. So it doesn't take 11 months next time. So I think there's a lot of things that could be looked at with recognizing and understanding Mr. Glover's point that it wasn't necessarily the failure of ACAC, but those different pieces need to get looked at with it.
Thank you. Terry?
Well, I agree that ACAC, I think that it's just a bare minimum to take a close look and see if there's anything that we could tighten up or clarify for future. So I think that it's an appropriate step to take. I think BCA is quite different. I think that BCA, we've realized upon this particular process, I happen to agree with my colleague, Mr. Gauthier, that it has suggestions with no recourse. It says, act properly, be good, but just like we would never tell our elementary school children, be good without defining what good means. We would say that means be kind, don't hit, don't this, don't that. We would give more direction. I think that we need to be clearer in the policy. And if you're asking for what my guidance would be, what I would ask you to do as a policy board is to maybe add some more clarity to it, and then add, so if that doesn't happen, what then? Add what would the next steps be? What would a grievance policy be? Because it doesn't currently have one. And for board behavior specifically. And then, what I just think it's lacking. And so I do believe that one is probably the one that needs more work, but there is no harm in going to ACAC and see if there's any way that we can tighten it up and clarify.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence?
I will just put out there for board members' knowledge that policy ACAC was last adopted in 2020. The last update from the NHSBA was also in 2020, so we are up to date on that policy as far as policy updates go, just for your information.
Thank you. Seeing no further
I
comments?
have one.
Sure.
I don't oppose the motion. If you want to make a motion to send policies back to policy committee, that's not a problem. We don't even need a motion to do that. I think as Sarah had said previously, but it's good to discuss it. I'm not going to amend the motion, but AC, policy AC is a parent policy to ACAC, and it invokes ACAC. So it should also go to policy, but I don't think the motion needs to be amended in order to get that done. So I will support the motion. Just wanted to make sure that everyone in this room and everyone who reads, who listens to this and watches this in future knows that this strengthening policy ACAC is not the remedy for the current situation we're facing.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
I think we're all thinking along the same lines. I'm just kind of wondering what the next step is. If we take ACAC and reevaluate it, do we need to have another motion on the floor where we have the policy committee look at whether we are missing entirely a policy that could be applied in circumstances such as this, should they occur in the future? Like what can we do so that we are not limited to just these two existing policies that we've identified today for potential recourse?
Ms. Lawrence, I'm going to defer that response to you if that's okay. Did you hear all that?
I did not.
Yep. So it's about whether or not we need to come up with another motion to say that we're not limited by policy AC and ACAC. Could there be potentially another policy that we could adopt or create that could address some of the misgivings in this process?
I mean, I think the nature of the policy committee would be to come back to the board with recommendations that we would be considering. So I think that would be open to the policy committee reviewing those policies as part of it.
Ms. Clark, is that okay? Great.
And it's all, the corollary is also true. If any board member has a concern or a thought or an idea or a concept for any policy, they can at any time communicate to the policy committee, and that can be there can be two-way communication in that way. So if you have ideas about what you want to see policy wise, then you should send it to the policy committee so they can incorporate it into their agenda.
Thank you.
That's
Seeing no
true for
further
the public,
discussion.
by the way, as well.
Let's call the vote. All in favor of the motion on the floor? Raise your hands. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gronster, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, did you hear that entire discussion?
I did.
Great. And are you able to tell us that you are not here? I know you did earlier, but you also weren't alone. So
Yeah.
any of the circumstances change?
Yes, I am still not here or still not there. But I am currently alone.
Thank you. And Mr. Gronster, because you are attending remotely, did hear the entire conversation. You are entitled to the vote. We're going to have to do a roll call vote. So starting off with Ms. Clark down in the end.
Clark, yes. Beam, yes.
Conklin, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Gothier, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Run, yes.
Peters, yes.
Glover, yes.
Blake Zimmerman, yes.
Yes.
Lawrence, yes. Hinckley, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
And Mr. Gronster?
Gronster, yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. It is important to note that only after the final appellate decision was rendered, this board reviewed the investigation documents and its two decisions. As a result of tonight's vote, these documents will now be made available to the public for review. They'll be made available upon request at the SAU office once all appropriate redactions are properly made and recorded in the coming days. We'll now open the floor for board discussion on this particular issue.
I'd like to make a statement.
Mr. Glover.
The reason why I was concerned about publicly releasing the documents is best illustrated in the paragraphs that you selected to read from the investigation report. Audio played loudly from a respondent's cell phone for approximately 20 to 30 seconds, during which time respondent, who did not stop and or turn down the audio. Oh, he didn't read that. My apologies, Stephen. I want the public to know that that is in the investigation report. And that belies the facts, that belies the evidentiary record. And it's very concerning that an attorney hired by us to be professional would construe facts in such a way that are belied by the evidentiary record. And that is one illustration of a failure of people somewhere on the line that should be at the heart of our autopsy on this. Now, I've been waiting a long time to take accountability for my actions at the trust committee meeting of November 9th. The reason why I haven't been able to do that is because I've been under threat of litigation since 3 days after that meeting. I was told by our chair that in consultation with SAU 39 counsel, complaints had been filed against me. This was not true. And that I had two choices: resign my public seat or face the consequences of an investigation, potential removal from office, and possible civil litigation. Under that threat, I was compelled to retain counsel. I participated in public meetings. I attempted to take a very serious topic very seriously. I subjected myself to the policy that was laid upon me, even though it is not obviously applicable. I've never conceded applicability, but I also never fought it. I attempted to make sure that that policy was being followed, because if we don't follow our policies, then our integrity is lost, our trust is lost, and our ability to pass budgets and win elections is lost. It took a while. It took some public right to know requests, one from Anna Goulet-Zimmerman, when I figured out that, wait a minute, the employees didn't wish to file formal complaints. And Victoria Paris's statements weren't formal complaints. And the email written to me by the investigator wasn't a formal complaint. So what's going on here? I tried every forum I could possibly try to find an amicable, sensible resolution. I tried internal communications before that was threatened. I tried conversations with the investigator that they hired, 3 calls lasting almost 4 hours, to no avail. I tried bringing this to the school, or to the SAU 39 board in January. I reported in February to this board that the action they had taken in January didn't work, and no further action was taken. I attempted to solve this internally through lawyer-to-lawyer communications. That failed. I was offered mediation as a solution in April by this board. That failed. And here's why that failed. That failed because the offer of mediation said, the mediation is designed to resolve the harassment matter and all matters related thereto. I said, I'm generally amenable to mediation, but I'd like to understand the following components. And I had a list, like who were the participants, who were the signatories, who are the parties, things like that. And as a courtesy, I said, oh, and by the way, to be transparent, I want you to know that I will be raising my claims at this mediation. My claims being the procedural irregularity and the lack of a formal complaint that I had yet to be produced. The response was, sorry, the mediation is not going to happen because I tried to negotiate a scope of process beyond which what was offered. That is disturbingly bad faith to me. The processes proceeded. The investigation report was issued. The decision came in, and still, even though the policy requires both of those reports to start with have sections of procedural sections, to start with the filing of a formal complaint all the way through that point in the process, and neither one of those reports started with the formal complaint. It's not a surprise to me because there is no formal complaint. The the investigator didn't address it. The decision maker, interestingly, there's a footnote where she writes that the scope of my authority is limited. However, I share respondents' concerns that there is no formal complaint. I'm the respondent, by the way. So I was compelled to appeal to make sure that this procedural irregularity was given its fair light and day in this matter, and I prevailed on that appeal. Finally, somebody other than me said, yeah, that's right. So that's my perception. That's what happened to me. This board back in November 18 and the Sauhegan board at an emergency meeting immediately thereafter laid upon me two motions. One was, in addition to the investigation, one was to restrict all of my communication with district employees to go through the superintendent. In essence, is what it said. I said, wait a minute, all district employees? You mean I have to get permission to have a parent-teacher conference? Oh, no. So that motion was amended to limit it to SAU employees, not just the two employees at issue here. Okay. At Sauhegan, they moved to strip me of all of my committee assignments. And I raised my hand and he said, whoa, hold on. What is that achieving? People just don't want to be a room and alone with you. Oh, okay. So that motion was amended to be somewhat sensible. Both of those motions have now expired by their own language. Those motions were until the matter is resolved. Now, those motions also did not inform me, and it was not informed privately, that certain supportive measures were requested by the employees. Those measures are already in the public record from the response to your right to know request, actually. An email to Stephen O'Keefe with copy to Stephanie Grund from Adam Steele, our former superintendent, saying specifically what those measures were. One of those measures, which I was unaware of until mid-January when the right to know request came in, and after the text message incident you've heard about, said, don't contact me on my personal cell phone. Gee, it would have been helpful to know that. I feel set up on that. I don't know why it wouldn't inform me of that particular thing. So easy to comply with. It was more important to me to fight for the integrity of our system here and fight for the truth of our community, and acknowledge what I did or didn't do, the accident that befell me and what I did after that, than to resign in shame. And what does that say about my character? What does that say about my leadership? So absolutely not was I going to resign my position under this threat. And right now, because the matter is resolved, those motions have gone away by their own terms. Oh, and by the way, I would ask our superintendent to discuss with the relevant employees whether and what supportive measures they want. If they want the same ones they had, if they want different ones, it's up to them to decide. And whatever they decide, I commit to you, superintendent, the public, my fellow board members, that I will voluntarily comply with whatever it is that they request. And if I fail, then you may call me to task on that, and you can give me a public lashing that I would probably deserve. I apologize to the employees and the board members who were in the room. It is, if anyone's phone has ever gone off and made loud noise when it's supposed to be a quiet place or it's unexpected, it is unnerving. When you feel and you believe that you have command over your phone, something most of us probably manipulate hundreds of times a day, and you're mashing buttons and nothing's happening, and time is ticking, and the nature of the noise is unpleasant and uncomfortable and embarrassing, the panic that you feel, the flustered you feel, just is orders of magnitude increased. And it did take some seconds to unlock my phone and get my fingerprint on the thing and hold it down long enough and shut it down. But I did. And I didn't leave the room to do that. I wanted to get that done right now, and I believed I could do it. And I did. I didn't know what had happened. This is in my report, which is already in the public record back in January. And by the time I restarted my phone, I shut everything down, hoping that it wasn't a virus or some weird thing. The phone came back up online and it seemed okay. And by the time I raised my head to look back at the people in the room, the business of the meeting had continued. The business of that meeting concluded successfully. I was unable to address it immediately after the meeting due to a back-to-back meeting. But after that second meeting, I started making phone calls. I started sending text messages. I notified their superintendent. No response. You want to talk about decorum and how one handles themselves in an accident. What about professional conduct is and about how you show leadership. It's not to deny what happens. It is to embrace that and address that. And I attempted to do that very night with no response. I attempted to do that by writing a written report asking for help. How can I make amends? Who can I apologize to? Do I need to be the cautionary tale for the public and make public statements about this so that people know this stuff can happen to anybody? And if it's a newsreel playing loudly, then it's probably pretty innocuous. If it's a virus, then you could lose all the data on your phone or your banking records or other personal information. And if it's sexually explicit material, then it's very embarrassing. So there are risks out there when one manipulating their electronic devices. And so I took measures independently without anybody's help from this school system. When I come to meetings, I can pull out my phone right now and it is in this mode. All open apps are closed. All notifications are cleared and it is on vibrate. It's in my pocket. I will not manipulate it unless there's an absolute need, such as if we were scheduling another meeting and I needed to look at my calendar, and only then would I manipulate very conscientiously. This is a cautionary tale that could benefit adults and students alike, anyone with an electronic device. So please learn from my experience and gloverize, let's say, your electronics before you go into meetings. So, as a lesson learned here, and if I had to be the one to share it, then so be it. I'm willing to do that. That's my accountability for an accident that befell me. It's now time for SAU 39 to take accountability for its actions. Who violated the policy? It's not the corporation that violated. The corporation is an entity made up of people. Who violated it? And what are you going to do about it? That's my question to all board members tonight and forevermore until there are answers to those questions.
So first, I want to thank Mr. Glover for accepting the accountability. I know this is something he's been wanting to say, and I think it's appropriate to say. And I think it's too bad that the process had to delay that for 11 months. I share the concern, and I want to say that I don't think anyone should be getting threats of the nature that you've described. And I think one of the questions this board has to ask is, how did those come about? Why did that happen? Who authorized that? Things of that nature. Because in this case, we happen to have some information, because John's a public official, about what the underlying allegations were. But when someone's taken aside, be it an employee or a board member, and said, do this or else, usually we have no information. And I think that's actually one of the big problems with the boards. I was not a member of this board until March. I tried so hard to get information on this. I sent open records requests. I got told that, the complaints, I asked for complaints that were written. I was told that they were not, they were confidential. I understand that in part under the Title IX process, but again, this process was different. And when I came to my first official full board meeting, there'd been a couple of emergency ones because it was right after I got elected that Superintendent Steele resigned. But when I came to my first full board meeting, that was when I was told that there was a formal complaint. And what you're going to see in these documents when they become public is that Attorney Sarah Helsted, who we first hired, issues this email where she says in part, I have determined that if accepted as true, the conduct could constitute a violation of Title IX, Title VII, and/or board policy BCA. As such, I have no cause to recommend a dismissal of the complaint, and the formal grievance procedure under board policy ACAC was commenced. I'm going to tell you that I think I failed you all at that first board meeting, because I said, okay, there is a formal complaint. I didn't know there was a formal complaint. There'd been requests, as I understand it, from multiple people for the formal complaint. We're told you can't see that till this process is done. And I accepted that. And I think when I look back and I think of my own accountability, what I should have said is I'm not voting on anything until I see that document. And I know our attorney's position would be that I'm not entitled to see that document until this is over, but I think we have to change that. I think we as a board have to move from what are we allowed to shelter to what do we have to, what do we have to protect? And if it doesn't have to be protected and it doesn't have to be kept confidential, it should be shared, at the very least with the board that's making these decisions and making these votes. Because if I had seen that letter, that email September 9th, I would have said, whoa, before we send this off to a decision maker, we need Attorney Helsted to say whether or not she thinks this is a violation of Title IX or Title VII, because she's not looking at BCA. BCA is not part of what was sent to her. BCA was not part of what she was reviewing. And it's very possible that that ended there, because I have no idea what's in her head, whether or not, but she uses the word and/or board policy BCA, which means this could be as simple as she thought this was a violation of a board policy that she was not even supposed to be investigating. I believe we have about $15,000 we still owe Attorney Helsted, and I think we ought to seriously be having a discussion about whether or not she went beyond the scope of what she was supposed to do, beyond the scope of what she was asked to do, and whether or not she even acted. I mean, she calls herself the Title IX coordinator, but it was on reliance on what she was saying, that this is a formal complaint. And she was very clear that this is a formal complaint. You'll see this in the packet. She emails John's attorney multiple times saying, my letter of this date, my email of December 13th was a formal complaint. Please understand, this was intended to be a formal complaint, accepted as a formal complaint. And to me, that's an issue. We at least should be looking at that. We rely on the information we have, but we can also do a better job at gathering more information in the process and insisting that we get that information as we go along. I have so many more things I could say on this, but since it's already late and I'm sure there are other comments, I'm hoping this is the beginning of a long conversation. And for now, I will hold the rest of my thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Grunt.
So one of the, One of the pieces that has bothered me for a bit. Oh, that is really loud. That's gonna pick me up, though.
You just shut the.
Shut off. I'll just talk from back here. Is we hired a Title IX coordinator. I know the engagement letter that I finally saw was very specific that said that she's being hired as an investigator. And knowing we call it semantics. But when you have an engagement letter that says investigate, it does, or says coordinate, it's very clear to me what was the person was, the Sarah Helstat was hired for. I think that one of the points of failure is as well that when we hire a Title IX coordinator, I think they should be independent and separate from the investigator. Because then you have two people looking at this to make sure there was a formal complaint, to make sure that it should go forward. When the investigator is the person that's hired as the coordinator, she kind of has an incentive to find a fact, find a problem to keep investigating. That bothers me. And I think when we look at policy ACAC, we need to make sure that those are two separate individuals. So there's always two eyes and two minds that are looking at this to make sure that before it goes forward, that it is documented correctly. That could have stopped this from the beginning.
Thank you. Ms. Peters.
I just want to address what I just heard for the first time tonight from Mr. Glover, which was the assertion that he wasn't aware of the protective measures. And I'll start by saying that the former superintendent, for whatever reason, neglected to add my email or John's to the first communication that went to the SAU board on November 17th, where he mentioned that he'd be putting protective measures in place. Stephanie sent that along to both of us the day following the November 18th meeting. But in the November 18th meeting, I was there when we were made aware of the protective measures. So I have to push back just a little bit that I was aware the entire time of what those protective measures were. And I don't want to argue, but I feel like that was not represented well to this group of people here.
Thank you. Any other comments? Discussion? All right, let's open up the floor for public comment. If you'd like to address the board, just come up to the microphone, state your name, tell me what you reside, and then you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Shall I await the timer? I'm going to start before it goes. Maybe I can squeeze in an extra 30 seconds. My name is Martin Goulet, town of Amherst. The SAU has recently had confirmed for them what many residents have been saying to the board now for nearly a year, that the SAU was not following the policy they claimed was the basis for their handling of the John Glover matter. It was clear to all who were paying close attention and who were reading the open records request results that there never had been, at least on the public record, any formal complaint. There are many questions to answer, and I'm sure public commenters will raise several of these. I want to focus on the very beginning of this incident, the time after Mr. Glover's phone disrupted the official proceedings of that trust meeting, but before the SAU board first met to discuss the matter. Glover's incident happened on November 9th, 2021. On November 12th, and again, before the SAU board had a chance to meet formally to discuss this matter, Board Chair O'Keefe with SCSB Chair Grund present met with Mr. Glover and suggested in a manner that Mr. Glover perceived as a threat that Mr. Glover should resign to avoid any next steps in the matter, which could include personal and family embarrassment, removal from the board, and or civil litigation. It was further stated that resignation would cause this matter to go away. I'm deeply troubled by this meeting, and my questions surround this discussion and its implications. First, what was the impetus behind Mr. O'Keefe suggesting only 3 days after this event occurred, and certainly before any formal complaint was filed, that Mr. Glover resign to avoid a worse outcome for himself and or the board? Whose idea was that? Why was that escalation of this incident deemed to be the best course of action for the SAU? On what authority could Mr. O'Keefe make such a matter go away, even if Mr. Glover did resign? Wouldn't that itself have been a disservice to the employees present and a gross violation of SAU policy. Was there an underlying reason why some members of the SAU board or then SAU administration would want Mr. Glover removed? I know of other intimidating threats made in the past by SAU to former employees to resign or else, even threatening criminal prosecution in one case I'm aware of. Does this board believe that this approach to employee and board member relations is appropriate? Are you not concerned that this tactic creates a climate of fear and stifles honest dialogue and truthfulness? Why would you tolerate such tactics exercised under the banner of your own authority? The authority that you derive from your election, that you pass on to the people that you appoint as leadership. I hope the board undertakes a complete postmortem on this matter and considers these and any other questions that other members of the public raised tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a copy of this statement, which I'll provide for.
Perfect. Any other members of the public like to address the board? Great. If you could just state your name, town in which you reside, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Annabelle Radowazo from Amherst.
Nice and loud.
Here.
Okay.
Annabelle Radowazo from Amherst. While it is important for the safety of the members of the board, I understand that like an assessment on this would be important, but the formal complaint and zero harassment happening because of the lack of complaint. There was no need to spend this much money on to solve an invisible problem. But speaking on behalf of a student for 4 years now, I would like to mention that the safety of our children in our schools and the $65,000 could have been used in better ways, such as repairing leaks in the ceilings around the skylights every time it rains, and the heating issues in the rooms where kids are known to even bring blankets in class because of how cold it is, or to just be used to grow academic programs or increase safety within the SAU.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to address the board?
Frank Bodwin, Dodge Road over in Amherst.
Thank you.
The identities of both the accused and the accuser should always be protected in both formal and informal complaints. This protection of identity never occurred and a formal complaint was never lodged. For the better part of a year, this dilemma caused pain to not only John, but to the entire community. How can the SAU administration and this board restore this man's good reputation? How can you rebuild public trust? Accusing John at a public session without a formal complaint and a complete thorough investigation was irresponsible. Confidentiality for these situations protects both the victim and the accused. Unfortunately, this situation was not handled in a professional manner, and now the taxpayers will pay the consequences during an inflationary recession. Should this situation have been handled properly, we may have been able to pay for a new school roof. My heart goes out to John and his family and praise him for taking a stand. Those responsible for this mess should take ownership.
Thank you. If you just state your name, town in which you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Kelly Mullen, Amherst. Can you hear me? Good evening. I have been following the investigation of John Glover closely since the emergency meeting was called on November 18th, 2021. I have listened as citizens called out the SAU for the unnecessary investigation, one that had no record of a formal complaint from day one. The fact that this incident was even reported was ridiculous and makes me question the actions of those who did so. I heard Glover say that Chairman O'Keefe had given him the option to resign or face the consequences, even when Glover had not yet seen the complaint in question. I heard John state repeatedly that his rights were being violated and that this board was not following its own policies. Concerns from citizens that spoke out at your meetings for months fell on mostly deaf ears. The board members who did raise questions were told by Mr. O'Keefe that the matter could not be discussed. Numerous members of the public questioned the steps taken and noted the missteps in the investigation. A couple of board members stated that the motion they voted for was not congruent with the steps actually being taken by Chairman O'Keefe and questioned that publicly. Those issues were all dismissed by the chairman. The legal drama went on for months, legal bills mounted, and the school roofs kept leaking. So yes, here we are. The final report now tells us exactly what many said on record for 11 months. And you think the taxpayer should be on the hook for these unnecessary legal bills? When did this board even vote to waste tens of thousands of dollars on this case? There were already trust issues between the community and this board, and this has made things much worse. If I was John Glover, I would sue the SAU for all legal costs and other damages. You sit and talk about your board policies for hours. It does no good if you can't or won't actually follow them. I think you all need a reminder that we elected you to serve this community and be good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. The level of malfeasance I have seen here is troubling. Perhaps some of you should no longer be school board members. At the very least, Mr. O'Keefe should resign tonight as chairman. The words resign or face the consequences seem very fitting, but are not directed at Mr. Glover this time around. If you were, as some have claimed, acting on the advice of legal counsel throughout this debacle, you need to hire new legal counsel immediately. As taxpayers, there is no way we should have to pay for any of this. Maybe you should all chip in and pay the bill. Except for you, Mr. Glover, you've been put through enough. And as a member of the community, I am ashamed and embarrassed by that. And we are now responsible for doing whatever it takes to make sure that this never happens again. March elections will be here soon. The board wasted an extraordinary amount of time and money on a lie that there was a formal report, time that should have been spent on real district concerns like those that have a direct impact on students, and taxpayer money that should have been put towards school facility needs. We continue to wonder why our
Your
school
time is up,
buildings-
but we'll give you a 30-second extension.
Thank you. We continue to wonder why our school buildings are in disrepair. It's called mismanagement of funds. Based on these circumstances, there is no way I am going to vote yes for you to manage a massive school bond. And I apologize to JFAC for that because they are working very hard. But you, I can't trust you to spend that money. I suspect others in town feel similarly. You are accountable to the voters and we are paying close attention. It's time you all take a good look at your actions and take the steps to right this ship or face the consequences in March. Thank you.
Thank you. Next member of the public.
Anthony Nino, Amherst, New Hampshire. So every report, just a quick brief. For about 8 years, I wrote reports for the federal government, and I fought hard to make sure that when someone years later picks up their report, that when they read it, that they saw a factual description of what went on. And I would like this board, or that whole board we see here, to look at the policies and see if there's anything in the policies that prevent a report from being released that is inaccurate in its wording or the facts. And if you find that, to go through the whole 400 pages and correct the word complaint and correct the word complainant. Because without a complaint, there is no complaint. And without a complaint, there is no complainant. 400 pages is a lot to go through. But if procedure had been followed, then we wouldn't have that problem, and it wouldn't. So I would like you to go and look at our policies and see if there's anything that prevents a report that is inaccurate from being released. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Thank you. If you could just state your name, tell me what you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Brian Coogan, Amherst, New Hampshire. I just had one observation sitting up there, reflecting on what I've been hearing from the boards, and I really what I'm hearing.
Right, just come closer to the microphone.
Sorry, Brian Coogan, Amherst, New Hampshire. Just my observation from sitting up in the upper decks there. I've been working with these boards for years now, and I go to many board meetings. I was actually there the night when they just decided to actually perform this investigative review. And I've never heard any of the facts from this case. Never. I talk to board members all the time. I'm very concerned that many people of the community seem to know a lot about this investigation that hasn't been made public yet. So I'm curious how this information is already out in the public if it hasn't been released.
Thank you. Wait,
Dwayne Purvis, Amherst, New Hampshire. Good evening. Good evening. About a year ago, there was a hawkish desire of this non-school board to launch an investigation into what obviously was a mistake. This body has no standing with the actual school boards, but has chosen to present itself as such. By law, this body is to meet no less than 2 times per year. The responsibility of this body is simply to govern the SAU, not to perpetrate investigations at will, and certainly not to direct school boards. The school boards answer to the voters or the Superior Court. The SAU is a service to the school boards. Get this right. The drama that has played out where this body has broken its own policies, the need to get Glover at the cost the taxpayers in excess of $65,000, and I hear another $15,000 needs to be paid, so it's $80,000. We don't know. What we don't know is what Mr. Glover has spent himself to defend himself. This board only authorized $5,000 thereabout for this witch hunt. Who is responsible for this unauthorized waste of public funds? Enough. This body needs to understand its lawful function. Given the deliberate abuse of process, I call on those responsible to resign. If they do not see that, I call on the school boards, you guys who have the teeth, because this body has no teeth, to conduct their own investigations and make the appropriate referrals to the Superior Court for removal of board members responsible for violating this policy and approving the approximate now $80,000 waste of the taxpayers' money. We all know that it was a stretch to think the Superior Court would remove a board member because lewd sounds accidentally came from their cell phone. However, we are certain the Superior Court will remove board members found misappropriating public funds and possibly send them to jail. This is serious. We cannot sweep this under the rug. Mr. Glover is not the only victim here. The generous taxpayers of these communities are victims too. Lastly, as voters, we need to look in the mirror as well. We live in an extremely successful and generous community. Given the level of intelligence and successful members of our community, it would be incredibly beneficial if more community members would get involved. We can no longer trust without verifying what is being presented, as this will only encourage more bad habits, financial waste, and loss of highly qualified talent. This is our opportunity. We must engage at all levels and prevent something like this from occurring again. I cannot sit on the sidelines anymore. The stakes are too high for all of us. Will you join me?
Mr. Purvis, just quick correction. The total cost at this point is $65,000. That is including the $13,000 that the school days are referred to.
Not additional.
That's still too much.
Great.
That their roof leaking and they're running around fix the roof.
Thank you. Any other member of the public wishing to address the board? Great, if you just state your name, time which you reside, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Casey Luce, Amherst. I'll make this quick. I'm quite angry. I stood up here in front of you, board, 11 months ago and implored you. My statement was very quick last year. And I said, please, for the love of God, where's the formal complaint? And if there isn't one, don't do anything. I looked at every one of you in the eyes as I went around the room and I asked you to please do that. So the bottom line, what I've learned tonight, in these many hours, and I think everybody, it's quite simple. You all, every one of you, just spent $65,000+, and the bill is still accruing, I presume, to verify what we all knew 11 months ago. Is that sort of the bottom line here? Can we just sum it up? You should be ashamed. That's our money.
Thank you. Great, we just state your name, tell what you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Lee Kakmar, Amherst. First thing, in the investigation, was it included that you can send text sounds to another person's phone from another phone? So I don't even know if that was included, but you can send sex sounds to phones from another phone. So I'd hope they looked at everybody's cell phones here, not suggesting anything, I'm just saying. Second thing, Title IX. A couple years ago, a student came before the school board complaining of sexual harassment. Now, where did that go? Did that go anywhere? That was a student saying that he had reported it to teachers, the superintendent, the RSOs. Nobody did anything. So this is the Title IX off of a phone film. We all see what's happening. So I just want to point that out. The public is very frustrated because it seems like you've heard from the student tonight, that money could have been spent to fix the roof. And then you're going to go ask Amherst to spend $100 million over crap like this. When we have kids saying it's really going on, and this didn't even happen on purpose. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Great, if you just state your name, tell me what you reside, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Deb Q, Amherst. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I just want to say that listening to this tonight is extremely upsetting. I am a taxpayer and I find that the actions of this board are not setting a good example for the body that they are supposed to represent. And I would like the town of Amherst to be reimbursed all the funds that have been spent on this folly. Thank you.
Great. We have any other person in, there we go. We have 2 people on Zoom, but our policy is to do in person. But your name, tell me what you reside, and you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
Mark Vincent, Amherst. 2 weeks ago at the Sauhegan board meeting, I requested a few pieces of information. Many of those have been provided here this evening. I asked for the cost. We have that number. I asked for the full details of exactly what happened. I'm assuming we're all going to see that in the redacted report when it comes out. And the other thing was, how are we going to make sure this never happens again? Part of that's going to be the policy discussion, but as a couple of board members have mentioned, that's only a small part of what needs to be done here, because it does come down to the people, as John stated. Everything can't be left to policy. It's implementation of that policy. It's what actions are taken around implementing that policy. And that has to change. I would echo a lot of the comments that have already been made, but I'm not going to do that because that would be a waste of time. But I will say this. It seems to me, from going back and reviewing the meetings from the end of last year and the beginning of this year, there was, I lost count of the number of times where it was stated, council advised this, council advised against that. You got some really, really bad advice from somebody, and stop paying them immediately. Get some better advice before you go forward, because that sounds like it's a big part of this. I will also, one comment I will echo, the taxpayers need to be refunded this money that was wasted. Absolutely must be refunded. So keep that in mind when you're in your budget discussions. We're gonna look for that. We might be back during a deliberative session to talk about that. And also, Mr. Glover has to be made whole for the money he was forced to waste on this. And I suggest that you don't make him litigate it. Take care of it. Take care of the taxpayers, take care of him, and get some better lawyers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, if you could just state your name, town which you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Laura Taylor, Amherst, New Hampshire. I thought tonight would be. Can you step a little closer? Laura Taylor, Amherst, New Hampshire. I noticed I haven't heard any comments from Mount Vernon residents being involved in this process or watching what's been going on. It seems like mostly Amherst. Sorry, there's one here tonight, I'm sorry. But I do want to say that the only apology I've heard tonight is from John Glover. And, you know, the board still will function when this moves on. And I think we should maybe consider changing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, you just state your name, town which you reside, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Greg Fritz, live in Amherst, and like my friend up in the nosebleed section, I didn't know much about this. Not sure how I've heard about it. I know most about tonight, and John, I just appreciate what you said about the cautionary tale part. My cell phone's up there right now. But I think you showed a lot of grace tonight. I don't know what it's been like for this time for you, and you know, you mentioned the cautionary tale part, but there's a positive role model that you've shown tonight through all this. I don't know you at all, but I just wanted to mention that I don't think I would handle this nearly as well as you did tonight, and I'm impressed by your demeanor. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? We have 2 virtual. Let's start here. All right, Carrie, if you could turn your camera on, identify your name, town in which you reside, and you'll have the floor for 3 minutes.
My name is Carrie Boyd. I reside in Amherst, New Hampshire. And I just wanted to, I want to thank the people that articulated themselves so well this evening, especially the young lady that spoke about our school and the situation that they are living in and the waste of money that has happened. The situation was totally mishandled. John was railroaded through this process. The situation could have happened to anyone, and there was no intent. In order to have some sort of harassment suit, you have to have intent. And we didn't have any here. And it's concerning that no one on the board questioned that this was valid. I ask everyone that's sitting on the board tonight, when you lay your head on your pillow tonight, especially the 2 people that came forward with this ridiculous accusation, I hope you think about your own humanity and try harder because you failed. Fire that attorney and retain new counsel and try to get our money back, because they should lose their job and some complaint should be sent to some sort of board. I think there should be a public apology from the board for not recognizing the incompetence of legal counsel and allowing this to drag on. There should be a public apology from Steve O'Keefe for not having the sense to get second legal opinion, and I call for his resignation. I think there should be a public apology from Victoria Parisi for allowing it to go on, and there seemed to be it was very opportunistic on her part, and I don't know what's going on with that, but something doesn't seem right. I call for her to resign, and I call for each one of you to stand up and give John his chair back. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. And if you could turn your camera on. Thank you. If you could just state your name, town in which you reside, you'll have the floor for 3 minutes. And you're on mute, sir. Sir, if you could just take yourself off mute.
Sorry, this is Muzi Husseini. I'm in the car driving back from New York. I've been listening keenly for the last couple of hours, and I'm going to make some statements which are politically probably rather incorrect, but that's the way I feel as a resident, as a taxpayer. It is abundantly clear to me that we have, by and large, an incompetent school board led by a very incompetent chairman who probably is, there's some nefarious reason why this was allowed to go on the way it has gone on. And there was some unholy alliance between the previous superintendent and the chairman of the board here. So if anybody, and the previous superintendent is gone, thank God, but this chairman, I'm sorry I have not met you, but as a taxpayer and public listening to it, you must take full responsibility. And if you're a self-respecting person, you ought to resign. This is unacceptable. Okay? And please use your God-given talents and be fair and be equitable and take care of the children and the quality of education of this town. I'm sick and tired of hearing about and the degradation of our academic output. I do not know what you guys do as school board members, what your expectations are of your children and the next generation. Please rectify this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, seeing nobody else, we are going to close public comment for the first of two. We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda.
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment before we move on to the next agenda item? Sure. Thank you all for attending and making comments. It's really important that we hear from you to help in our decision making. One of the failures that seems obvious to me is that it wasn't a failure in principle. I'm not talking about the threat. That's its own separate issue. But to try to take a serious matter seriously is a noble goal. Applying an existing policy to a person, a board member, to where it wasn't really an obvious applicability was a noble pursuit, which is why I complied with that. The reason why this board was involved was because the superintendent's office had no jurisdiction. You need to remember, we are SAU 39 corporation. We have an executive branch, a CEO, we call it the superintendent, and all the employees thereunder. We have a legislative branch, it's called the school boards. That's where all the policies come from and the oversight comes from. Superintendent had no control or power over school board members. So his jurisdiction was lacking. This board, in their noble pursuit, assumed jurisdiction over the issue. And one of the key problems here, and we're going to have to sort this out, board members, is that the board only acts when a quorum of the board members are present and make a decision. This board was excluded from the decision-making process. One member of this board was not excluded from the decision-making process, and it wasn't me. Board decisions were made on behalf of the board by one board member without informing the board, without calling meetings, whether they're with the attorney and non-meetings or non-public meetings or as needed, so that board members could hear what advice was given and have an opportunity to ask their questions in real time so that they could help make a decision. Now, if you're making good decisions as the one person who is making decisions, then people probably aren't going to get upset about it. But when the decisions that are made lead you to violate your own policy and you're steering the board off of a cliff, then that becomes a problem. And that is a failure of leadership to put oneself on an island and not share information and not understand what the jurisdictional role is a problem that is going to need to be addressed, and how boards behave and share information and make decisions and what the roles of its leaders are and its members are relative to one another. Because at the end of the day, there is no one board member who has any more authority over any other board member. Board members are not teammates. We are individually elected to serve our constituents. We have policies like aspirational policies like our ethics policies in an attempt to play nice in the sandbox with one another. But at the end of the day, we have to persuade each other of our decisions. And in order to do that, we have to share information with each other so that we can have robust debate and come to sensible decision-making. That is a fundamental failure of what happened over here in this matter, and it needs to be addressed.
Thank you. So let's go on to our consent.
Actually, can I say one thing? One thing that we've heard this evening a few times, and I know I've been mulling it over in my head, I've mentioned it to a few people, but our SAU council we've used, I don't know what the process is, the one that we choose. I would ask that we review who our council is and whether we want to continue with that council. I'm not sure how that discussion occurs, but I'm going to make that request.
Mr. Vane.
Somebody mentioned stewardship, and I think that we're primarily talking about money, but I think on top of that, we have to look at people. Part of one of our most important resources. Educational environments, boards, is the administrations, the faculty, the staff, how we treat them is incredibly important. A year ago, when I was chair of the Second Advisory Finance Committee, we recognized that there had been an unusual amount of turnover, especially in the administration in the last few years. And there were a lot of concerns and rumors that a lot of those departures were involuntary, like the worst resignations. That they were motivated to evade policies and procedures. And what they resulted in was taking away people's dignity. There was a lack of diligence in the process. There was no explanation. There was no they just took away a lot of our trust in the process, in the way that things were handled. I think tonight we have a new administration, we have a new interim superintendent, we have a new principal, we have a new board, we had an election in the meantime. And I think you have my commitment, I think the other commitment of a lot of people on this board, that era of coerced resignations ends tonight. It ended tonight with this resolution. That we will get to the bottom of this. We will find out why there was an engagement letter that was signed that did not say cut in microwave. It was coincident when we were asked many times to see that letter to ensure that it did say cut in microwave. No concerns. There had not been a determination of violation or of a complaint. formal report. I'm also concerned that there were further, of course, measures taken that try to almost blackmail a resignation. And we need to get to the bottom of this as a board, and you have our assurance that it will happen. You have my assurance that I'll be my best efforts to see that it happens. And if there are resignations that need to happen, I hope they do, and hopefully see to them. That's all I have to say.
All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. We've got 3 items on our consent agenda. Number 1 is the enrollment update. Are there any concerns about the enrollment update? Any concerns about the facilities report? Any concerns about policy DAF? And Ms. Lawrence, is that a first read or?
That had been sent back to the policy committee to review the language, and the policy committee determined that the language was appropriate and up to date.
Thank you. And so that's gonna be a first read tonight?
Yes.
And if I remember, that was in response to one of Tom's observations, right, Tom? You were, if I recall, you were concerned about
Attachments.
strings being attached to the accepting federal grants and what those might
Yes,
entail.
It was more concerned about my favorite word, equity, as opposed to cost and effectiveness in the proposals. And so I just didn't like it was essentially allowing the federal government to pick favorites. And so I will vote against anything that has that in it, no matter what. So.
Okay. And
Any government.
do
just
you,
as an aside.
do you still see what you saw in it before? So you're dissatisfied?
I don't remember, to be honest.
Well, I want you to make the vote you want to make on it. Or maybe the question could go to Sarah. Were any changes made?
No, no changes
Oh,
were made
okay.
because the language was per the RSAs.
I got you. Okay,
like
sorry,
specific,
Tom.
So that's why the changes, there was
And I
nothing
don't-
to be changed. And for clarity, it was all from the RSAs.
Correct, and I don't doubt that the RSAs had to be in there, so when we vote, I will just vote no, just so everybody is aware of that.
So seeing no other issues with consent agenda, let's entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda items 1, 2, and 3.
I'll make them. Steve, I would pull that one out because I will not support that one, so I will
Thank
vote no to all of them if we leave that in there.
Okay, let's then break it up and entertain a motion to accept consent agenda item number 1 and number 2.
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Motion is made by Ms. Parisi. Who's the second?
Ms. Lawrence.
Ms. Lawrence, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we're gonna do a roll call vote. Is Mr. Grocer still online?
Clark, yes.
Thank you.
Beam, yes.
Conklin, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Gothier, yes.
O'Keefe, yes.
Grund, yes.
Peters, yes.
Glover, yes.
Blaise Zimmerman, yes.
Thank you, yes.
Lawrence, yes.
Yes.
Mr. Gronstra?
Ronster, yes.
Great, that motion carries. Next will be a motion to accept consent agenda item number 3.
I'll make the motion.
Great, made by Ms. Parisi,
I'll second.
seconded by Ms. Lawrence. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Clark, yes. Beam, yes.
Conklin, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Gothier, no.
O'Keefe, yes.
Grund, yes.
Peters, yes.
Glover, yes.
Blaise Zimmerman, yes.
Thank you, yes.
Lawrence, yes. Chiefly, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
Mr. Gronstra?
Ronster, yes.
Great, that passes. Moving on now to board chair updates. Let's start off here in Amherst. Mr. Goff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. So we had our meeting last Thursday night. It was a long one. We spent the majority of our time discussing facilities. And in the end, we did decide to move forward with our school project of an elementary school to add that to the ballot for this year. So we will be working over the next, 5 months, give or take, to be raising awareness for that project and fine tuning things as we go along. But we will be putting an elementary school project on the ballot. It is an elementary school project only. In related facility news, we did approve $91,000 to be withdrawn from our capital reserve fund for a few small projects at Wilkins. And then for architectural and engineering fees for a roof and unit ventilator replacements over at AMS, part of our long-term business plan for that building. And then we also saw the first draft of our budget, which in short has a 3.7% increase, which is 1.1% above the default budget for next year, which is a 2.6% increase over what we are operating on in a default this year.
Great, thank you. Let's head up the hill, Mount Vernon, Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you. The Mount Vernon School Board met on October 6th, so a couple of weeks ago. We enjoyed a student presentation. Some current sixth graders reported on their fifth grade experience. Soleil and crew did a brilliant job. If you have not had a chance to see that video, please go back to the recording and watch it. It's worth your time. We did enjoy a budget planning discussion. At the time, we did not have numbers presented because it's too preliminary, so we expect to hear that at our November 3rd meeting. We discussed staffing and the need to consider potentially making one of our specialist positions full-time so that we can acquire and retain staff appropriately. Our specialists are all part-time to some degree. We also reviewed preliminary findings from our community communications survey and decided to leave that survey open until our next meeting so that we may have a better pool of respondents. One thing that we did determine, however, is that a physical mailer is not worth it. There's no bang for your buck to actually send something out to the Mount Vernon community. People all responded online through QR codes or otherwise. And finally, we heard some co-curricular club proposals. We're excited to welcome a mural club, Spanish club, and game club to the Mount Vernon Village School. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's come here to the Sohegan School District, Ms. Grunt.
Sure, thank you. October 13th was our last meeting. We started out with a presentation from the science domain leader. She spoke about the work being done to increase the rigor, align grading, reporting, and improve instruction practice. We really appreciated her candor and being upfront about here's the things we are not doing well, and here's what we're doing to improve those things. And we're looking forward to that. We're going to have presentations like this from each of our departments going forward. So that's exciting to have that conversation with our faculty. A couple things, athletic success, our Sohegan co-ed golf team won Division III championship. Academic success, national merit semifinalist Keegan Hitt, congratulations. And we commended, there was a commended student, Max Iverson. We have 5 students going to All-State Jazz, which again, I think last year we had 5. This is just a phenomenal group of students representing Sohegan. So thank you very much and congratulations. We also had our budget presentation. We have a 2.9% increase or $578,821 that we are in process of reviewing. We've had multiple budget meetings this past week and a couple next week. Then we'll get into our second round of our draft and at our next meeting in 2 weeks. The last thing is the Fall Musicians Showcase, November 1st, here in the theater. Come and, enjoy our music students that will be performing here.
Great, thank you. Let's go to JFAC with Mr. Coogan.
Before Brian comes down, could we have a comment on the chair updates? A question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, it's not a question, it's a comment. The science domain leaders did something very interesting. One of the challenges that they're facing is something that vertical integration can fix. And there's a misalignment between 7th and 8th grade and the high school. So I can imagine that it may be a similar theme that we hear as we continue to communicate with our faculty. And to that extent, the conversation about how we serve 7th and 8th grade students, whether it's in the Sohegan Cooperative or how it stays in the Amherst School District, where that they go, the facilities piece, it's all of a piece. There could be an elegant solution here that serves students very, very well. And I want to put that in the brains of the board members and the public for future conversations.
That's a great topic for our new business section later on, so thank you. Let's go to JFAC updates. Mr. Coogan.
Thank you. So as you heard from Mr. Gothier earlier, the recommendation by the Amherst Buildings and Grounds Committee has been reviewed with the Amherst School Board. As you heard Mr. Gothier offer the warrant article that they'll be putting forward come this March. As we looked at the Sauhegan Building and Grounds Subcommittee, based upon some of the curriculum changes that the district is looking at and the potential usage of space and some of the other complexity of that, they are waiting for that outcome to be determined before making any further recommendations at this time.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Coogan?
Steve, I will just make a mention that as part of our meeting, we did discuss at length, and we had talked about this before, but we did discuss the pros and cons of any sort of use of the annex for an extended SAU or a cooperative district, whether it was 7th and 8th, or if it was 8th grade, if it was 7th grade, we did discuss those options, but looking at the population that would be left over in the high school, and then looking at the impact that it would have on students in a middle school environment going to the high school campus, and also on the high school kids, the lack of programs that could be offered for them by removing them from the annex and enforcing them all inside that main building. Those were among the numerous reasons that we decided not to go forward with an idea like that, using the annex for, or at least engaging the Sauhegan board for discussions on using the annex for an Amherst middle school project, however that may have worked out. So we did have that conversation. And on the SAU website is the entire presentation that Ms. Parisi went through during our meeting. And certainly when she went through it quickly, partly because of my fault. But we also have many slides on there that have a lot of information that really encapsulate the last 4.5 years of work. So I would encourage people to look at that if they have, and then if they have questions, they can certainly email our board as well.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on to draft SAU budget number 2. Ms. Facey. I think we're all going to need to move for this part. Actually.
No, I actually.
You got it on your devices. Okay.
Yeah, I actually shared it with all the board.
So the name of it is SAU 39 FY 24 draft. Speed access.
It's in your email. It's in your email.
Everybody get it?
Yeah, it's in email.
Yep.
Everybody okay?
That? Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
All right, great. So yes, so tonight we have draft 2 of the SAU budget. Basically, I'm not going to go through all the positions that we spoke about with the SAU position in draft 1, and we'll just get right to the heart of the financials. So in summary, the budget is a 4% increase in this draft 2, $117,976 over the FY 23 adopted budget. As we discussed last time, the budget can be divided into 2 main categories. Personnel, that includes salary, benefits, and non-personnel, that's further divided into subcategories of facilities, technology, and operations. So for personnel, the main drivers are the retiree payout in FY 24, proposed 3% salary and benefit pool, additional salary and benefit increases that were implemented in FY 23. And this was something I didn't mention at the last meeting, but thought it was important to bring up the contracted cleaning service moved to a part-time employee. So that cost about $3,000 more and moved from the non-personnel student personnel. For non-personnel, there is a reduction in facilities cost, primarily that same cleaning service change, a minor increase in technology, and a minor reduction in operation. So we also now have the ERC maximum rate for health insurance at 4.1%, an increase, and 1.5% for dental. The New Hampshire Retirement Employer Contribution rate was adjusted to +1, and it's a 1.38 decrease for teachers, 0.53% decrease for non-teachers. So this slide shows the changes from draft 1 to draft 2 by the budget categories: salary, benefits, facilities, technology, and operations. The change in salary is just a health insurance buyout
for a part-time employee that was omitted in draft one. The actual insurance was not budgeted for that employee, so there's no offset. The change in benefits is the largest change and reflects increase in health insurance from the projected 3% to 4.1%, and the reduction in dental from 3 to 1.5, as well as an increase in unemployment compensation, decrease in workers' comp for a total net increase of $5,944. The facility budget changed by an increase in the property and liability insurance cost of $500. And I don't know if I mentioned, we just received those new cost updates from the technology and operations budgets only changed due to a reclassifying of some accounts, but no net dollar change between the two budgets. So the total dollar amount from draft one to draft two is an increase of $7,140. So this slide provides the breakdown of the proposed change in dollar amount of percent from FY 23 to 24 by the budget categories, with 3.4% of the increase attributed to salaries, 1% benefits, minus 0.5% for facilities, 0.2 for technology, and minus 0.1 for operations, for the total 4% increase. So this budget by category, this slide shows the proposed total dollar amounts of the major budget categories and their percentage as a total of the entire FY 24 budget. So as expected, the majority of the costs are at the SAU, are for salaries and benefits, with 63% for salaries, 28% for benefits, facilities at 2%, tech at 4%, operations at 3%. So since draft one, the New Hampshire DOE published the average daily membership attendance, or the ADMA, and equalized valuation. So we are able to do the calculation and determine the assessment to the three school districts. So the first step in this calculation is to reduce the proposed expenditure budget by any available revenue, including unassigned fund balance and the anticipated E-rate. And this calculation provides the amount of the SAU budget to be apportioned to the school district. E-rate revenue is generated from discounts received from telecommunications, internet access, and internal connections. And in turn, we're able to offset some of the technology costs in the budget. The unassigned fund balance revenue is calculated using the unassigned fund balance from 2 years ago, reducing that by what was retained to offset this current year's SAU proportion. And that balance is used to offset the FY 24 budget and determine the amount to be apportioned to the districts. Then the average daily membership in attendance and the equalized valuation property are used to determine the percentages to apply to the budget to be apportioned. Those percentages are 57.92% for Amherst, 9.85% for Mount Vernon, and 32.23% for Southampton. So I know I just rambled off a lot of calculations. These all can be seen in the apportionment tab of the budget file. So this chart just provides a comparison from FY 23 to FY 24 of the apportionment amount and the percentage. So Amherst will increase by 0.18% or $137,521. Mount Vernon will increase 0.62% or $39,606. And Southampton will decrease by 0.8, but an increased dollar amount of $52,177. So the total dollar increase to be apportioned is $229,304. So this table, this is the FY 23 to 24 apportionment comparison, showing both the expenditure and the revenue side. So this shows the increase in the amount to be apportioned due to changes in the expenditures and revenues. And as discussed, the expenditure increase from FY 23 to 24 is $117,976. There is though less unassigned fund balance revenue available, so there's a decrease of $111,328. So the total amount of the increase to be apportioned, the change from 23 to 24 is the $229,304. So this just gives an explanation of why it's not just the $117,976 that's being increased, it's actually a decrease in revenue as well. So in summary, the budget is an increase of 4% from last year, due primarily to increases in personnel costs, as discussed in the last presentation, to maintain competitive wages in the current economic environment, as well as the retiree payout, changes in benefits for health, dental, and New Hampshire retirement that resulted in a net increase. A decrease in facilities due primarily to changing from a contracted cleaning service to a part-time employee, as well as relatively minor changes in tech and operations. And then it just is a review of the process and next steps, and I just highlight where we are tonight, which is draft 2 presentation. And next up, the SAU Budget Committee will meet on Tuesday. And then we'll be publishing the public hearing notice, presenting the board with draft 3 and holding the SAU public hearing. And once we have those final amounts, we'll be able to put the apportionment or the assessments rather into the school district budgets.
Great, thank you. Any questions?
Oh, and one more thing, in the budget file, so I just made a few notes on the table of contents. I'll put in this presentation, I'll link that. There's a few new tabs. The first new tab is a draft 1 to draft 2 variance.
Yeah.
Definitely pull that up. So that's just a quick way to show really the dollar amount that I went through, but the folks be able to see draft 1 to draft 2 and the dollar amount and the percent variance. Next tab. So yeah, FY 24 budget draft 2. So that's the updated budget. And then also just to note that the subcategory tab, salary and benefits, facilities, technology, and operations, those include the updated amounts. And I made note of that on the table of contents, just so folks know that it goes up. And the categories chart is updated.
Questions for Ms. Facey?
We have had some questions submitted. We're all up to date on answers, so thank you for those. For board members and the budget committee members. So they've been really good questions.
Seeing no questions, I believe we go now to our SAU Budget Committee. Mr. Goulet.
Thank you, Martin Goulet, Budget Committee. So just a request. Didn't know I was on the agenda tonight. I happen to be here for other purposes, as you may have noticed earlier. I would appreciate notice going forward if I'm going to be on or if our committee is going to be on the agenda. So the SAU 39 Budget Committee was formed, and for those of you that aren't familiar with this process, it's a group that is going to function much like the Amherst Ways and Means or the Sauhegan Advisory Finance Committee, basically increasing transparency and providing community input into the SAU 39 budget process. So we've had one meeting, and I don't know the wisdom or otherwise of the group. I was elected to chair the committee. the group has asked, a number of questions, both, large and small. I would commend, Amy and the team she's had working on the question and answer tab, because that's been really, really helpful. And some of them fairly significant, asks that have been pulled together reasonably quickly. Our process going forward is, as Amy indicated, we'll be meeting, next week. With members of the SAU, our second meeting on the budget, and then the budget committee itself is planning on coming together to come up with any findings and recommendations that we want to make as part of a presentation back to this audience. At this time, we don't really have any substantive comments to add, but we do look forward to, as I said, arriving at those and contributing them to this group, probably at the next budget meeting, I would guess, but there's the off chance that it might need to be in December. Take any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you.
I have one.
Yes, Mr. Clark.
Are you pleased with what you're seeing so far? Not you, maybe not you personally, but is your sense of the committee, is they're pleased with the process and pleased with the numbers?
I mean, I think there's been a number of questions. I think there's still open questions that are being evaluated, with respect to some of the increases, with respect to some of the uses of funds that have been freed up from other sources. So I can't comment on pleased, displeased. There's still detailed evaluation going on. I will say, I think a theme that we hit on a number of times throughout the first budget committee meeting was with respect to some of the salary increase pools that get allocated. We just, pretty uniformly across the group want to make sure that we're transparent between the SAU, between the administration and the board about the process for evaluating employees, how those pools get allocated for increases, so that, there can't always be transparency into the exact dollar amounts, but just that, that there's always an evaluation and performance review process. And, that there's an understanding as to, what it takes to, to get those sorts of evaluations and merit increases. So that's probably the big theme.
Great, thanks for the update. I appreciate you and the committee members' time diving into this. Thanks.
Love to say it's our pleasure.
Your duty.
Great. Thank you. Next is the superintendent.
Sure. Submitted the report, a couple of highlights. One thing, what's great about being a superintendent, in the same day, you can see kindergartners all the way to seniors in high school and get a chance to do some learning walks with faculty, which is great. I noticed we're going to talking about doing a calendar shift from late starts to early releases in February and March to account for some training. So you hear more about that. Busy. Once it hit budget with 4 budgets, a couple of negotiation, facility project, and other. I just looked through 4 days this week, 32 different meetings I've attended. So a little busy. That's all right. Happy to answer any questions or any updates, but keep it pretty busy.
Great. Any questions on the superintendent report? Seeing none, let's move to Mr. Conklin with the superintendent search update.
Yes, thank you. I'll be short and sweet. We have a meeting coming up on November 3rd, where we will review the NESDEC report that was generated based on completed surveys and public forums. You all should have received that this evening or this afternoon as part of the board packet for the agenda next week. So we'll have a substantial discussion at that time about the candidate profile that has been put together based on the surveys and forums. And so we look forward to that. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time, but we will have a substantial discussion next week.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on to new business. And Mr. Glover already stated one, maybe titled it curriculum.
Vertical integration was the language that our science domain leader used. Sounds about right.
So if we can break that down with our superintendent, maybe we can add that to a future agenda item in terms of how we're working now to better integrate our middle school and high school curriculum.
Absolutely. And then when we bring like math and when we bring the topics, we can add it to the
Yes.
subject matters as well.
Perfect.
So each of those monthly weeks at the Sauhegan piece, we can certainly bring it here too.
Perfect.
Cool beans.
Any other new business? Seeing none, let's open up the floor for public comment 2 of 2. Any members of the public like to address the board?
Wayne Purvis, Amherst, New Hampshire. This has to do with the, I guess the,
Wait, can you speak a little bit closer to the mic? I can hear you.
Dwayne Purvis, Amherst, New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Regarding the committee, and I've already reached out to Josh. The preliminary committee, I guess, they're looking for in the search for the superintendent. I'm troubled, and look at me and don't misunderstand. That when I read something and they're looking for people, whether it's a job or whatever, and they'll tell you the demographic that they don't want, or not, they imply the people that they want, suggesting we don't want you. That's troubling. 75%, nearly 75% of the households have children in this community. If you're trying to stack that committee with 75% are parents that have children in the schools, how does that look? So I want you guys to think about it. Oh, it's magic about the number 4, or what the intent here, but the people that don't have children in the community are also contributors to the school districts. And we might have opinions and thoughts and so forth as to the successes. We want to see the successes as well. So what I'm going to recommend, and I'm not sure if Josh has spread this around, whoever's on that committee, if they would, if you guys would give some consideration to that all over again and open it up to consider the residents of Mount Vernon and Amherst. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to address the board? Mr. Goulet.
Martin Goulet, Amherst. So I just had I had a sort of visceral reaction at the end of the comment period on the John Glover matter and the quick transition to regular business, and don't fault that per se. You have a meeting to conduct, but I don't want this board to transition back to regular business. I think that there's a fundamental broken element to the business here. And I recognize, there's things you have to do between, now and putting budgets out and getting them passed and whatnot. But this was not a small incident that, you guys are going to be able to just forget. This is something that was fundamental. I don't yet get the sense that all of you have recognized the extent to which you did something that was fundamentally improper. And so I'm hoping that as you continue on the business as usual that you have to do, because it's part of your responsibility, that you also take some time to do some introspection, as we heard from some on the right-hand side of the audience tonight, or the table tonight, but didn't hear at all from the left-hand side of the table tonight about what was your role in making this happen. You're going to do a postmortem. I heard Dan practically guarantee that. We'll be holding you to that. But you should all be pounding on the table about that. And I just hope that you don't, silently, slink back into business as usual, and hope this is now all normal again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, do we have a second on public? All right, we will have one more non-public. What's the ours? Be under 91A3L. Consideration of legal matters. All right, so let's do a roll call vote for a motion to go into non-public.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great, starting off in the end.
Clark, yes. Dave, yes.
Conklin, yes.
Parisi, yes.
Gothier, yes.
Keith, yes.
Grund, yes.
Peters, yes.
Glover, yes.
You guys.
Lawrence, yes. Yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
And Mr. Gronster.
Ronster, yes.
Thank you. I will call you so we can get off.
Will we be coming back into public to do anything substantial?
There's no reason for us to.
All right, then can we move back to the music room so that people can go and our visual tech people can break it down?